I want to share some thoughts on the concept of democracy because it's a word that is misused, probably overused also, by virtually every politician, including the only politician that I like, who is the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And he misuses the word. And when I say people misuse the word, I'm not one of those people who runs around saying, oh, well, it's a democratic republic, right, and all that, because I think most of the people who say that don't actually know what they mean when they say that. The word democracy. First of all, I want to make a point that I want to justify throughout this little rant here. Democracy is the most unstable of all forms of government. If you want to argue that anarchy is a form of government, well, it's not. It's the absence of government. If you want to argue that that's the most unstable, okay. But the most unstable form of government, which ultimately leads to anarchy and or authoritarianism, is democracy. It is the most unstable. The system that we have now is the most stable form of government. And just so people understand, our Constitution is the oldest Constitution on the planet. Not oldest society or anything necessarily. There are older cultures and everything else, but our system of government has changed gradually, but we have not had the need to discard our Constitution and rewrite a new one and create a new system of government longer than any other country on earth. We have gone through great changes, and the question has never been, is the Constitution obsolete, until recent generation. The question was, how do we incorporate new people into this social contract? The idea was not to void the social contract. Some people today want to do that. The question was, how do we include these other people into the social contract? But virtually everyone recognized the social contract for what it was and recognized it as legitimate and as sovereign. Democracy, some people would like to say, well, in today's day and age, what it means is rule by the people. Okay, so we want to say that democracy is ruled by the people. Unfortunately, democracy is one element of our system because if it's a check on our leaders. Because unfortunately, when people get power, typically people almost always abuse that power. It's human nature. People are very, very bad with handling power. Very, very, very good people, when the more and more power they get, it becomes very difficult for them to manage. That's human nature. So our system was set up to do several things: to limit power that any individual or any group could have. And our system, when people say we're a democratic republic, this is what I hope that most of those people mean. Our system was set up to protect the rights of the individual human being. Okay? That's what our system does. Our system is not set up so the majority of people get what they want, because that leads to chaos and hell. It's a bad system of government. And all our founders thought that too. They all wrote about it. The word democracy is not in the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. And people like John Adams and many others who wrote about democracy were not fans of it. Most political scientists throughout history, overwhelmingly unanimously, were against it because they knew how terrible of a system it was. And we have been heavily propagandized to think democracy is a good thing. When I hear the word, there's a negative connotation with me, but that's something else. Democracy, you have a very exploited population for different reasons. I'm not trying to say there aren't authoritarian systems of government that aren't worse and exploit people worse, but what I'm saying is there are systems of authoritarianism which I would never want to live under, but there are systems of authoritarianism where once certain regimes establish their rule, there is no longer any need They may do horrendous things, but there is no need necessarily to turn the population against itself. Once they've established order, typically, they want to maintain that order. In a democracy, you have people spreading all kinds of instability. George Soros is a great example. He is funding all kinds of instability. And things like the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, and all these things, what they are doing is they are designed to take advantage of this concept of democracy. They are turning individual factions against each other and spreading hate and turning the people against each other. That's what democracy does. Okay? And some authoritarian governments don't even do that. That is a symptom of democracy. And we are not a democracy, but we are leaning more in that direction than we ever have. I'm also not saying that there are certain groups that shouldn't have the right to vote. That's not what I mean. In our system, the Constitution talks about equal protection under the law. So if you reach a certain age, in our country it's 18, you should have the right to vote, unless of course you're a felon, and through due process you have been convicted of a crime. That's another story. Although even states like Florida are trying to allow felons to vote. I think it's California. Other places are wanting to allow 16-year-olds to vote. They want to. The most easily exploited, the most easily manipulated people are being encouraged to vote, and it's for obvious reasons. But that's democracy. That's what democracy. That's a result of democracy. So our system is designed to protect the rights of the individual. So we have a Bill of Rights. We have balance of power. We have all these things. Democracy is a component of our structure. It is not the basis necessarily. It is one element of our republic. Because it is one of the many checks. We have the three branches of government. We have federalism, so we have competition between states and the federal government competing for power. The three different branches compete for power. Politicians compete for power because people vote for them. And we have elections at different times. And certain things in the Bill of Rights, for example, the right to bear arms, that was put in there to keep the government right-sized. Okay, it wasn't put in there for hunting so people can collect guns or anything like that. That's not why it was put in there. It was put in there to prevent people from people like Ocasio-Cortez, when they actually have power. She doesn't have really power, okay? But I'm saying in systems of government like the Soviet Union and whatnot, when those people did get power, lunatics get power. If our system was to be undermined and people like her were in power, that is why the Second Amendment is in there. To prevent those people from abusing rights. There are so many checks. Our system was set up to protect the rights of the individual. It is not a democracy. That's something very, very, very important that I just don't think it's talked about enough. It is the most unstable form of government. I want to say it again. Authoritarian governments are more stable. China is an authoritarian form of government. China is much more stable than what a democracy would be. And a lot of people point to, they say, oh, the United States isn't the only free country, and you have more countries that are more democratic in Europe and all that. And people just don't, when they don't understand the big picture, Europe and a lot of these European states, they would not exist but for the United States, okay? We are the hegemonic power. We are the anchor that to some extent holds the world order together. It doesn't mean we rule the world necessarily, but we sort of set the world agenda with our influence. And all these NATO countries that are more democratic than the United States, they fall under the NATO umbrella. And they also get to spend more money on healthcare and things like that because we foot most of the bill when it comes to military protection and all that. We typically keep the sea lanes open and all that. Typically that responsibility falls on us. And if it wasn't for the Marshall Plan after World War II, and if it wasn't for the United States becoming involved in major wars, i.e. World War II, there would be no Europe as we know it. There would be no European Union. Okay, those countries would look a lot different. I also want to say the United States came in at the end of both world wars, so I don't want to take away. I mean, we don't know, compared to what the British and other countries, France, had to go through in those wars. We got it very, very easy. We came in at the end, and we lost a lot less, and we didn't have, the war was not on our soil. But nonetheless, we are the reason that the world has a somewhat democratic order. Democratic order has a somewhat stable, peaceful order. If you want to say it's not peaceful, if there was no anchor, if the balance of power were to shift, and it does shift periodically, it hasn't shifted since World War II, although it was going in that direction before Donald Trump got elected. There's always a period of instability before a new order is established. The Electoral College, okay? I want to talk about the Electoral College. The Electoral College was a check on democracy. And as far as I'm concerned, in 2016, the Electoral College did exactly what it was supposed to do. It prevented a criminal demagogue like Hillary Clinton from just, for granted, just walking around entitled to this office and getting just massive populations of people to just vote for her all over the country. The Electoral College is the only thing that keeps every region in the country relevant. Okay? New Hampshire, Iowa, all these places, none of them would be relevant. None of these places would be completely forgotten when it came time to national politics if it was not for the Electoral College. Completely forgotten. And toss-up states, they're not static, okay? The states that are toss-up states are changing all the time. So it's not like there's these 6 toss-up states that forever are toss-up states. They're always changing. Populations are always moving. The map is always changing. So we can have brilliant political minds like Donald Trump and Kellyanne Conway can come in and say, hey, look at this Rust Belt region that's voted Democrat because they're working class voters. They voted Democrat for decades. They've been abandoned by this Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is taking them for granted. Let's swoop in because they've all gotten screwed with the way previous administrations, Republicans included, have handled politics recently. Let's step in and give these people what they need. And they did. They stepped in and they protected coal miners as opposed to putting them out of business like Hillary Clinton. And they are protecting the automobile industry in the United States. I think there's at least one major steel plant that's reopened. There may be many more than that. That region is doing better than it was. And backing out of the Paris Climate Accords was very good for that region, and that region is going to continue to vote for Donald Trump. The point is, without the Electoral College, those people would be forever forgotten, and you'd have New York and California choosing the president every single election. Not only that, and this wasn't supposed to be an Electoral College rant, but you would have voter fraud, which there's always been voter fraud, okay? You could steal elections anywhere in the country without the Electoral College. The Electoral College puts a huge limit on voter fraud. You have to manipulate multiple states, and it's much more difficult to do. With at-large elections, you can manipulate any county in the country. And if one side was playing fair and one side was not playing fair, hey, I mean, it's gonna go to the people who aren't playing fair if you're manipulating votes and stuff like that. So the states are in charge. That's another check. This country is not a democracy, and I don't even like saying it in terms of it's the rule of the people. Yes, it is. We the people Abraham Lincoln had famous speeches about, government of and by and for the people. Yes, okay, but our system of government is not designed so the majority of people get what they want. It is designed so that all people in our country, have a chance at being respected and having their dignity respected. And people who want to be left alone can be left alone. It is designed to protect the rights of the individual. That is so important. Majorities will abuse minorities. Okay? That's what can happen. We don't like a certain group of people. They're 1% of the population and we don't like them. We're 60%. Let's kill them. Okay, democracy can lead to genocide, and it's happened. There are plenty of instances of that, where the balance of power shifts, like in Rwanda or even Iraq, or the same thing would have happened in Syria with certain populations over there. It's not a good thing when power shifts and there aren't enough checks and one group becomes dominant over other groups. It is not a good thing, okay? So we are not a democracy for many different reasons. Democracy is one element of many elements that hold this constitutional republic in check. This is the greatest system of government on earth. I have not found an example, that's also an opinionative statement, so I'm not wrong, but I have not found an example. I have studied European politics, and it's very interesting. I enjoy studying it, and I'm not saying we're better than Europeans or anything like that. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying, I have not found an instance of any type of government that I find to be better than this system of government. It is the most stable form of government, while also allowing the best living standards a people can have. And it needs to be maintained. And the more I study these things, the more I think about people like Ronald Reagan when they say freedom's not hereditary, it needs to be protected from generation to generation. That statement resonates with me more and more each day. I understand the wisdom of that statement. It's true. It's not hereditary, and we do take it for granted. And there's always a group of people who are fighting to maintain this system one generation at a time. And people don't understand the high horse we're riding. Okay, the election of Donald Trump, whether you like him or hate him or know what you're talking about or not, saved this country as we know it. We were heading in a very bad direction. And we pass on this legacy of freedom and American excellence, which there's nothing wrong with, one generation at a time. One generation at a time. And there have always been forces that want to take us down, because we stand in the way of some atrocious groups of people gaining power. There are people who abuse human rights all over the world. But if the United States were taken out of the picture, it would allow for all kinds of things to occur. And if these socialists, these people who are obsessed with power, who demonstrate that democracy is a popularity contest, okay? It's a popularity contest. If these people get in power and they gain too much of it, it is not a good thing. So our system of government needs to be constantly protected. The First Amendment must be protected. We must allow idiots to say what they want to say. And we must allow people to speak on college campuses. We must protect these rights. People must be allowed to keep and bear arms. Okay, that's not some redneck thing. That's not what that is. That completely is an understanding of what human nature is. All these things hold this system together, and they can't be taken for granted. I'm sure there are thoughts that I've left out. We are not a democracy. I don't like that word. There's a negative connotation in my mind when I think of democracy. because I see so many people exploited by all these movements and things. Complete exploitation of people. And we are not a democracy. We believe in protecting the rights of the individual. And that does not mean people vote for the government to give them everything they want, because that leads to disaster.